Okay, so we're diving straight in today. We're talking about a generation that, well, it often feels like it's playing a supporting role. You
Yeah.
know, Generation X.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones sort of sandwiched between the baby boomers and the millennials.
Mm-hmm.
People call them the middle child, sometimes even the forgotten generation.
That's exactly right. And look, if you were born roughly between 1965 and 1980, this is definitely for you.
Yeah.
But even if not, you probably know Gen Xers. They can be your colleagues, maybe your parents, friends.
Sure.
Today, we're really trying to get past those old, kind of tired stereotypes about slackers. We want to unpack who Gen X is now. We've got some really interesting recent data about their lives, their work, how they spend money.
Absolutely.
Hmm?
Because understanding this group, and they were about, what, 55 million strong initially in the U.S.?
Yes, something like that.
Smaller than the boomer wave, which was huge, like 75 million, and then the 62 million millennials that followed.
Yeah.
So understanding them gives you a clearer picture of, well, where things are heading.
Right. And that smaller size, like you said, probably played into that feeling of being overlooked. And their upbringing, it was pretty unique, wasn't it? Think about the rise in single-parent households when they were kids.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them were the original latchkey kids, that really instilled a strong sense of independence pretty early on.
Right. Had to figure things out themselves.
Totally. And culturally. They grew up with MTV hitting big, the explosion of grunge Nirvana, right?
Yeah, the flannel shirts.
Exactly. The flannel, that whole DIY vibe fueled by thrift stores and the start of home video games like Tetris, Donkey Kong, and Douglas Coupland's book, Generation X, that really captured the mood back then.
Okay. So let's fast forward to today. The picture is, well, it's way more complex now. We're talking roughly 64.5 to 65.8 million Gen Xers in the U.S. Still a big chunk of the population, like almost a fifth.
Yeah, significant.
Born in that 15-year window, so now they're in their mid-40s to late 50s heading through 2025. Those really pivotal midlife years.
Right in the thick of it.
And what's fascinating is this generation actually got more education than the ones before them. It was the first time more women than men actually held college degrees.
That's a huge shift. And they're more diverse than previous generations, too, although, less so than millennials and Gen Z.
Okay, so let's get into their professional lives.
Uh-huh.
Because this is where those old, kind of lazy slacker labels, from movies like Reality Bites or Singles, or that old-time magazine quote about them supposedly balking at work.
Yeah.
They just completely fall apart.
They really do. The reality is Gen X is deeply involved in leadership now. Seriously, we're talking CEOs of massive global companies like Satya Nadella at Microsoft,
Right.
major world leaders, Emmanuel Macron. In fact, some studies show they hold over half, about 51% of global leadership positions.
Wow. Over half.
Yeah. And think about this. The average age someone steps into a CEO job, it's right around 53. That's smack dab in the middle of the Gen X age range.
Okay, but here's where it gets, really interesting and maybe a bit confusing. Despite being so present at the top, the data also seems to show that Gen Xers got promoted slower than both boomers and millennials. Something like 1.2 promotions in the last 5 years compared to 1.4 for boomers and 1.6 for millennials.
Yeah, that is interesting.
That makes you wonder, why? If they're reaching CEO positions, why the slower climb overall?
That's a great question. And, the slower climb, it could reflect a few things we see in how they approach work. Maybe having come up in more hierarchical structures, they're less focused on just climbing the ladder super fast at any cost.
Okay. More about the role itself.
Perhaps. Maybe more about mastering their current job, getting deep expertise, or, prioritizing that work-life balance we know matters to them.
Right. Hey.
And they also play this really vital role as a bridge in the workplace, don't they? They get both the pre-digital ways and the digital world.
True. They saw it all happen.
Exactly. They make up about 31% of the U.S. workforce, which is substantial. And here's something telling. Nearly half of all workers say Gen Xers are the best managers they've ever had.
Really? Why is that?
Well, people often point to their independence, their pragmatic approach, their flexibility. So maybe promotions are slower, but their impact clearly huge.
Okay, let's pivot to their finances.
Yeah.
Gen X definitely weathered some big economic storms, right? Hit hard by the dot-com bust, then the 2008 crisis.
Oh, absolutely. Really tough times.
But the data shows they've kind of bounced back in terms of overall net worth.
Yeah.
The generation now holds, 28.6% of the nation's wealth?
Yeah.
which sounds pretty substantial.
Yes, they have definitely built back some wealth, but, it's important to dig a little deeper than just that headline number.
Okay.
When you look at retirement savings, specifically, the picture looks, well, different. The typical Gen X household, they have around $40,000 saved for retirement.
Wow, only $40,000. That seems low.
It is, especially compared to many boomer households. A big chunk of boomers, like 45%, have $250,000 or more saved up.
That's a huge gap.
It is. And here's another key thing.
Okay.
Gen X carries the highest average debt of any generation. We're talking around $61,000 per household.
Oof. So wealth on one side, but serious debt on the other.
Exactly. So while they've managed to accumulate some assets, they're also juggling significant financial burdens.
And with all the economic uncertainty we've seen lately, that must be really putting the squeeze on them.
It seems like it. There is data from late 2024 showing that over half of Gen Xers, specifically those aged 46 to 55, were cutting back on, non-essential spending.
Makes sense.
And about a quarter said they were occasionally even missing bill payments.
Wow. That really paints a picture of, like, a financial tightrope for a lot of them.
It really does. And, these averages, they hide a lot of variation.
How so?
Well, there are big disparities in retirement savings across different racial and ethnic groups within Gen X. Black and Hispanic households often have considerably less saved and less access to things like employer retirement plans compared to their white counterparts.
That's a critical point.
Absolutely. And we also have to remember Gen X was really the first generation where the retirement landscape fundamentally shifted away from traditional pensions where your income was more guaranteed.
Right, the defined benefit plans.
Exactly. Towards 401ks, these employer-sponsored plans put much more of the saving responsibility directly onto the employee.
And that shift happened right as they were entering the workforce.
Pretty much, yeah. And some economists, they've even called Gen X the first downwardly mobile generation, partly because of factors like wages not keeping pace compared to previous generations, plus that heavy debt load we talked about.
So, okay, how does all that economic pressure then shape their approach to work?
Yeah.
You mentioned that independence earlier, the latchkey kid thing.
Exactly. That upbringing, it seems to have really fostered this strong sense of self-reliance, a pragmatic kind of get-it-done attitude in their careers.
Yeah, I can see that.
They're good collaborators, sure, but they also don't necessarily need constant hand-holding. They're pretty good at working autonomously.
Makes sense.
And let's not forget tech. They grew up right as personal computers were becoming a thing.
Right. They weren't digital natives, but they adapted fast.
Totally. So they're very comfortable with technology. They're that bridge generation again between the old analog ways and the new digital stuff. And interestingly, despite those old slacker myths, they really value work-life balance. That's something they definitely share with millennials.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about how they spend their money. Because despite some of these financial pressures we just discussed, some data from 2021 showed Gen X actually had the highest average spending of any generation in the U.S.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm guessing housing is a big chunk of that, like it is for most people.
It is, yeah. Housing is the biggest expense across the board. But it's a consistent pattern for Gen X. They generally outspend other generations. The average is around $95,700 annually per household.
Wow. That's a lot of spending power.
It really is. And they control a significant slice of the income pie, too, around 29% of the total annual household income in the U.S.
So businesses really need to be paying attention to them then.
They absolutely should. And what's interesting for marketers is their brand loyalty. Over half tend to stick with brands they know and trust.
Okay. Less likely to switch.
Seems that way. And get this. They also have the lowest rate of ad avoidance of any generation. Only about 17% actively try to skip or ignore ads.
Huh. That's really valuable info for anyone in advertising or marketing. And their habits seem pretty modern too, right? Like using tech for shopping.
Definitely. We're seeing over half, 51%, have actually bought something directly through a social media platform.
Interesting.
And while they still use cards and cash, a majority, 56%, say mobile wallets are just easier, more convenient. Loyalty programs are also a big deal for them. 72% say those programs influence where they shop.
Okay. And what about local versus big chains?
That's another interesting point. They show a stronger preference for shopping at local businesses compared to other generations.
Supporting the community.
Seems like it. And don't underestimate how digitally connected they are. Their digital media use is right up there with younger folks. Facebook and YouTube, those are key places where they actually discover new brands. 56% say so.
Okay.
We also saw a shift during the pandemic towards buying more store brands. And that seems like a habit that might stick for many.
Saving money where they can.
Probably. Oh, and here's a fun, maybe surprising fact. Gen X. They're actually the top buyers for the luxury brand Gucci.
Get out. Really Gucci.
Yep. So it shows, while they appreciate value and practicality, they're not against a bit of high-end spending either.
Fascinating mix. So, okay, as we sort of wrap up this initial part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
it's really clear that Generation X, well, as one source put it, they've proven it more than holds its own.
Yeah, definitely.
Despite often being kind of overshadowed by the bigger groups on either side, they're clearly a major force in leadership, in the workforce, in the economy. Now, let's move into our outro and kind of think about the bigger picture here.
Absolutely. So just to summarize, we've seen this real shift, or at least we should see a shift in how we view Gen X. They're far, far beyond that old slacker image. They hold a huge number of leadership roles around the world.
Right.
They've navigated some serious economic ups and downs, and they now wield significant spending power. Although, yeah, that often comes with quite a bit of debt, and for many, retirement savings that are, frankly, lower than ideal.
And it really just highlights those characteristics that seem to define their journey, doesn't it? That independence forged early on, their adaptability, navigating massive tech changes, economic crises, and that sort of pragmatic, no-nonsense way they approach things.
Which really brings us to a key question for you, the listener, to think about. Given where they are now midlife, these complex finances, their influence in leadership, what do you think the lasting impact of Generation X will be on society, the economy, future generations?
Yeah, what are the unique lessons, maybe, that we can learn from how they handled all that rapid change and economic uncertainty?
Exactly. It's definitely some food for thought. Maybe consider how these insights about Gen X change how you see the dynamics between generations today, or what's happening in the workplace, or even consumer trends.
Yeah, it adds another layer to the conversation.
Precisely. Because while, the headlines might constantly focus on Gen Z and the millennials really getting a deeper understanding of the often overlooked Generation X, well, it offers a crucial perspective. I'd argue it's indispensable for understanding both where we are now and where we might be heading. They might not always shout the loudest, but their influence, it's undeniably significant, and it's still shaping the world all around us.